if you've been traumatized by purity culture, by religion, by a harmful or destructive group, it wasn't your fault. There was nothing that you could have done or not done or said or not said or believed or not believed that would have made that your fault. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey, I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we are talking about Paul and Morgan again, because I have been meaning to make a video about the harms of purity culture for a hot minute, and then Paul and Morgan just went right ahead and made a video about purity culture, advocating for the harm that it causes, and so this was a stars aligning moment. So thanks for that. We are talking about religious trauma, purity culture trauma, and all those things. So first of all, to be clear, if those are sensitive topics for you or button pushers, I'll put a playlist up here of like cool, happy, fun times that are not triggering. Please take care of yourself. Please honor what you need and be careful to not, push your own buttons needlessly. Before we get into the video, I want to give the same caveat here that I give on all of the videos about Girl Defined, Paul and Morgan, religious fundamentalism generally. We're speaking about this because these folks have a tendency of, first of all, advocating that the only approach to religion is their very fundamentalist, legalist, and harsh perspective about religion, that's the only way to be religious, which is not true. But second of all, these people also have a history of platforming really problematic and harmful and traumatizing beliefs and then hiding behind the identity of like, I'm a Christian and so therefore you can't criticize me, which is not cool. So we are talking about these people not because I have beef with regular religious people, but because I don't feel good about leaving content like this just like up and like uncontested on the internet as a clinician. My hope is that we can debunk and like set the record straight about some of the misinformation and disinformation that's being spread here and help to educate folks and create a safe space around deconstruction and healing from religious trauma. That said, along with that, all of the content on this channel is about broad strokes education and learning. This is not therapy, has not been therapy, never could be, never will be therapy. If you need a therapist for yourself, there are always links in the description for you to go do that. But again, I just want to be clear, this is not that. So with all of the caveats out of the way, let's just get into the video. Okay, Paul and Morgan made this video, or live stream rather, called Has Purity Culture Hurt Our Sex Life? So we are going to watch this. Thank God it's only 24 minutes long. Hopefully this video won't be egregiously long. Here we go.
Did we grow up in purity culture?
I mean, I grew up in a Christian home.
Okay, we waited 2 seconds into the video. The thing that's confusing to me about Paul and Morgan's content specifically, but I think a lot of the people in this fundy niche do this, where they're choosing to make a video about this topic, but then also seem to demonstrate some discomfort in answering these questions specifically or like explicitly. You know what I'm saying? Like this sort of pause and like, well, I grew up in a Christian home. Like no one forced you to make this video. Like you didn't have to talk about this if you didn't want to. And also like your life partner is the one who's asking you the questions. And so if that's not a question you want to answer directly, you would think that there'd be a convo beforehand about like, how are we opening this video? In what way should we start this conversation? It's just very confusing to me, the like beating around the bush energy when like y'all are the ones who chose to make this topic, because to me it demonstrates a discomfort with being direct about what their beliefs are and that they have some discomfort about their beliefs being labeled as like harmful and repressive and hyper conservative, which they are, to be clear. But again, if you have that discomfort, like I'm just confused about why the choice was made to make that content in the first place then.
Okay, first I have to just say, I don't like the term purity culture. I think honestly, because it's no longer even purity culture, it's called toxic purity culture. Like nobody that talks about purity culture normally is talking about it like it's a good thing. They're like,
correct,
it's toxic purity culture.
Correct.
There's no such thing as good purity culture. It's all toxic. And so I really don't love using the term purity culture. I don't know. I mentioned this in a feast like several videos ago, and I can't remember what I said, and I think it was like cut out now, but like I talked about how I wish we wouldn't call it like purity culture, we would call it something culture, and I can't remember what I said. But for today, I'm saying I feel like it's biblical culture. The church was trying to teach, has been trying to teach biblical culture, and has got lost in the weeds. The enemy has snuck his way into teachings and preachings, has snuck his way in with lies and condemnation through purity talks.
So perhaps it was largely coming from a place of we desire, as the Bible does emphasize purity, we desire to admonish our youth in that, and it was taken too far in some regards. And we're
You know what this reminds me of? When this is like a very common experience, to be clear, folks who are recovering from childhood abuse, sometimes folks want to have conversations with parents who were abusive or neglectful or what have you, and there is usually a desire for folks who have survived that kind of abuse to have that acknowledged by the person that was abusive towards them, right? And to be clear, I'm not advocating that everyone do this. It's a very touchy issue. It's very important that we have like the safety and like the support and all the foundational skills to be doing that if you want to do it at all, because you don't have to. But it just reminds me when like someone will confront a primary caregiver about the abuse that they suffered, and they say, well, I'm sorry, I'm the worst mom ever, the worst dad ever, whatever. Call it whatever you want. I don't think it's abusive. I just call it looking out for you or being a good parent. In my day, we called it being a good parent. Just because there's a discomfort with acknowledging the impact of a particular behavior doesn't mean that changing the name of it will make that harmful consequence go away. It just is confusing and also disingenuous and frustrating to me that because Morgan has, I'm assuming, it seems to me to be this way, has a discomfort with honoring the harm, the trauma that purity culture has caused, that we'll just label it something else. We'll just call it something else, and then it's fine. It's not purity culture anymore. It's not toxic anymore. It's just biblical culture now. It's the same. It doesn't matter how many ways we try to like dress up a turd. If it's still a turd, it's still going to smell like a turd. It's still going to have the same impact as a turd. It just is frustrating to me, like this commitment to like, I don't want to sit with the consequences of that, because again, first of all, no one forced you to make this content. If you don't want to address it, then don't. But second of all, it feels very disrespectful to the people who survived very genuine and very life-changing trauma at the hands of purity culture.
We're about to get to some of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Morgan, that rant that you just went on.
I had to.
No, there was value in that. When most people think of purity culture, and there are like when you say that, some people's mind goes to, oh, it was toxic because it shames blah 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 and it teaches this.
Yeah.
But some other people might be like, oh, well, yeah, like it was emphasized for me not to have sex before marriage. It was emphasized for me to not dress super seductively. It emphasized, and so in some people's minds, it's not such a terrible thing. You guys kind of get the idea. I don't really want to like dive in and make this video all about what is purity culture. It'll kind of come out in this conversation. But
Okay. There's just whatever. We'll just keep going. It's fine.
But yeah, Morgan, without further ado, start. I mean, let's. I desire for this. I desire for this to be a very honest conversation.
A very honest.
As opposed to what? Dishonest one? Is that happening? Are you guys entering into this content creation process making dishonest content? Like, I'm confused about that disclaimer. The other thing about this that is just important to point out, I was gonna leave it, but I want to talk about it. We've talked about this ad nauseum with regard to Paul and Morgan, Girl Defined, Bethy specifically, just like this, again, this like fundy niche. In recent months, years maybe, there's been a concerted effort to steer away from these words and phrases and things of that nature that have become popularly labeled as like problematic issues, right? Like they're sort of leaning away from the buzzwords that are heavily associated with purity culture trauma, with religious trauma, with deconstruction and all that stuff. And in my opinion, the goal in doing this is purely from an optics perspective, and this is why first of all I'm continuing to make this content, but second of all that I give this warning that I give in all these videos, because from the outside, avoiding these phrases and changing the messaging ever so slightly to like dress it up to seem more progressive and more sex positive has caused folks to like question, like, are they going through a deconstruction process? Are they maybe becoming less harsh? And like, in my opinion, no, because what's happening right now is that Paul literally just did this. Morgan also just did this. They're trying to just avoid using the words that will land them in the hot seat in terms of like the court of public opinion. But there has been no meaningful change to the actual core beliefs that these people hold, that these people prescribe to other folks, and that these people believe themselves and also think that everyone else ought to believe is the capital T truth about the way that life is supposed to be, that relationships are supposed to be, that people are supposed to be, which first of all, again, they have no credentials to be assigning that as the truth. But second of all, doesn't change how harmful and traumatizing these beliefs are. Just because you're using a vocabulary that's not quite as heavily associated with traumatizing topics doesn't make the beliefs less traumatizing. They're still traumatizing.
Conversation, is that what you said?
Yes, because I think some people might watch this and be like, oh, Paul and Morgan are going to come on here and say, no, purity culture is awesome and it didn't affect their sex life at all. Like, I want to be honest, and I know the reason you brought this topic up is you want to be honest. If it did negatively affect things.
A few months ago was watching, I was just on Instagram and I think a reel popped up and it was someone talking about purity culture. They were also talking about purity culture and how toxic it was, and they're also like Christians and whatnot. And I'm just like, oh man, like was like growing up, what I learned and heard really like toxic and horrible, and I don't even realize it, and now I'm gonna have to like deconstruct what I was taught about purity.
No, not the deconstruct word.
No. And so I really did just start thinking about all the things that I was taught, and thinking about my marriage now and our love life, and like, do I have things that I need to work through? And it is interesting because I will say, like, there are things that I am processing and working through. Like, one specific thing is just like this idea that we are called to be pure and modest and meek, mild, gentle, spirited women, and men in certain areas, but like for women, for me. But then also, like, I am allowed to be this like sexy, spicy, ferocious, sexual human being with my husband.
And I think that just what you just said right there actually catches maybe some of our, I don't want to say haters, but some people off guard, because they watch us and they're, especially like maybe the non-Christians that watch us, are like, oh, Paul and Morgan are fundamentalist, they like purity culture, blah, blah, blah. And then they see us talking about how awesome sex should be within marriage.
Yeah.
And how we should be open.
Which, to be clear, is still an extension of purity culture. Just thinking that sex is fun within marriage doesn't absolve you from being subscribers to purity culture, because it's literally like the whole central focus of purity culture is remaining pure until marriage. I think historically the church, and like the fundamentalist perspective especially, has kind of varied in terms of whether folks believe that sex is meant to be fun and enjoyable in marriage. But it's really not uncommon in this like fundamentalist niche for folks to say sex is beautiful, sex is like, a beautiful part of God's design for intimacy, but within marriage though, only within marriage. That's incredibly common, and again, it does not mean that someone's not a subscriber to purity culture. Like, they do still very much push this rhetoric on their channel, and like that, like, it's this, just because you think that sex is good now doesn't mean that you don't believe in purity culture. I'm so confused by this belief.
To spicing things up, and we release this PDF and they're like, wait, can those two things go together?
They get really mad.
The only people who think that sex being fun can't go together with purity culture are you like this niche. I think it's like pretty widely accepted within like secular circles that sex is meant to be fun.
Yeah, because they're like, you're preaching all the time about modesty, and then you release a sex PDF.
But so I like that you bring that.
Which is a fair point. I think a lot of folks have this critique of people in, again, this fundamentalist niche, that for folks who seem to be particularly concerned with modesty, with sexual morality, with privacy, that there is an awful lot of singing and dancing going on about sex and intimacy and genitals and like all of this kind of stuff. Like, I think most people find the rate with which these people discuss the intricacies and the nitty-gritty of their particular sex lives and sexual behaviors online with strangers to be a little bit confusing and like not in line with how aggressively they champion the idea of modesty. I think especially in the fundamentalist circles, the like thought tends to be that modesty is only about the clothes that women wear, the behaviors that women model, not about speaking about sex or intimacy or whatever. There's like a weird looking the other way policy that seems to happen around pregnancy and around sex in marriage, where like it's totally fine to share very intimate and personal details about their genitals, their sex life, their sexual behaviors, as long as it's in marriage. That's not immodest, when actually it is like quite revealing, I think, for a lot of people.
That up. Because that's a good point.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you women out there can relate, especially if you're married now. Like, what is the balance? What does it look like to be a modest, humble woman and then like flip a switch at night or whenever with your husband or at home
or
being
in the morning?
Sexy human.
Lunch break.
You see?
Being a sexy woman.
Most people would find it uncouth to openly, publicly, in a situation that's not explicitly sexual, and in a situation where no one else has agreed or consented to be an observer for someone's sexual behaviors, to just announce that you enjoy having sex in the morning or over lunch break, or that you're sort of like indirectly making the sexual advance at your wife. Most people, regardless of their religious orientation, just like sitting and having a conversation with someone, to hear the husband like doing this number and then talking about how he wants to bone his wife over lunch would be like, wow, that's like kind of a lot. That's like the crux of the issue here, is that like there's a particular fascination with the idea of modesty, but also somehow no fear or sense of withholding oneself about just announcing the desire to bone your spouse at a moment's notice. It's like those two things don't align.
And so I think maybe that to me is maybe the biggest thing that like I've had to work on, because I don't think that there were sermons. I don't think there were things or teachings that I heard growing up or as a young adult heard from, whether it was pastors or older women that mentored me, of like what it looked like to be a sexy, godly woman.
Which is a byproduct of purity culture. This is what I'm fucking talking about. When we do this thing where like, we don't believe in purity culture and we don't, whatever. Like, first of all, yes, they do. But second of all, this is the same. Like, just because we've dressed it up in different vocabulary doesn't mean that this discomfort with discussing sex or like honoring that sex is meant to be fun doesn't exist in purity culture. It very much did. This is a byproduct of existing in a culture that shames particularly women for having sexual desires, for wanting sexual pleasure, and for being sexual beings, but also that teaches that it is immodest, it is sinful, it's wrong to want sex, think about sex, have any lust, experience your own body, discover your own sexuality as an individual, but also that it's sinful, it's wrong, it's bad, it's shameful to not be a sexual being, to not be a sexual goddess, to not be sexually available at any time that your spouse desires it, in any way that your spouse desires it, as soon as you get married. Like within a moment's notice, it's your job to make the switch from don't think about sex, don't think about anything related to your body or intimacy or anything physical, and then turn it on. Literally, it's your turn to, it's your time to just like all of a sudden be this transformed being. Like that's a lot of pressure. And this is also a central focus for folks who've experienced religious and purity culture trauma, which is that this is a confusing message to try to integrate into one's own life and into one's own body. When you have no comfort or familiarity with your own body, all of a sudden the expectation to not only be able to do that, but also to be able to do that and like you're supposed to be doing that in company with someone else who wants to consume you in a sexual way is very alarming and a really, really traumatizing shift to have to make. That's a byproduct of purity culture. Like we can't separate those two things.
Because it is just such a weird thing to balance, but it's very real. And And it's sad because
Hello?
there are so many Christian women who struggle when it comes to marriage and having sex with their husbands. Like,
Yes.
they don't know how to be sexy. They don't know how to have a fun time, how to
Yes.
just let loose.
Why?
Because they've been taught their whole life, like, you better keep your clothes on and be a good girl and never let a man look at you in a
Hello?
lustful way. And then it's like, now all of a sudden we have to turn that switch and be sexy for our husbands. So yeah, I'd say that is probably the biggest thing that I'm working through, processing through, figuring out, finding the balance. But I don't think that that's like life damaging, ruining me. Like, I don't know.
Okay, first of all, this is what I'm talking about. This is why it's so frustrating to me that these folks will again and again deny their proximity or involvement in believing purity culture, upholding purity culture, peddling or like promoting purity culture, but then in the same breath say, oh yes, I'm working through these things because, well, like some toxic people, some people in the church taught this or didn't teach this. And so like, sure, I've been working to live, but not because of purity culture though, not because of the things that I believe. Surely it's not because of that. Like, wow. That's not how that works. But second of all, this is so invalidating and hurtful just because it hasn't been a life-changing, life-damaging, traumatic experience for Morgan, which to be clear, I don't know. I know that a lot of people have doubts about whether she's being truthful or not. It's not my place personally. Like, I don't believe that that's helpful either. I'm just choosing to believe her at face value here. But just because it hasn't been traumatizing to her doesn't mean that it hasn't been very traumatizing to other folks. And again, this is the thing that I'm talking about, is that I think they're inching closer and closer to acknowledging that, like, yes, maybe purity culture in some ways has been toxic, which to be clear, purity culture is toxic. It is harmful. It upholds a lot of problematic beliefs and norms in relationships that can very much be dangerous, but they might be inching closer and closer to acknowledging parts of that, but still then prescribing the same belief system that's caused the trauma in the first place, and in the same breath devaluing the experiences of other folks who are saying, yes, I survived the same thing and it was life-changing, life-damaging, traumatizing to me. They choose to not acknowledge that. There's literally a comment on, like the top comment on this video right now is someone talking about how traumatizing their involvement with purity culture was. Paul and Morgan have not acknowledged it. They're happy to acknowledge all of the positive comments that they get in their comment section, but they have not acknowledged that, and that's what I'm talking about. This is the issue that I take with this.
I don't know. So I personally wouldn't say purity culture or whatever was toxic for me growing up.
So I guess that makes me wonder, okay, say the flip side of that had occurred with you and there had not been an emphasis on, and would you say that what you just described, looking back on it, you're like, ugh, that was a negative of purity culture that taught me to be ashamed of my sexuality? Or was it like, no, they did it in a fine way, but it still kind of negatively affected my sex life?
I don't feel like it like largely negatively affected our sex life. I think that by the grace of God, I was still, from the beginning of our marriage, able to usually have a fun time and, like, you know, turn the sexy on and stuff. But I think just as I continue to grow in my marriage and as a woman of God, like, I'm just continuing to grow in that aspect of my life as well, as what it looks like to be a sexual woman, because that is very much a part of what God has called me. And that is, I do believe, a very big part that the church just doesn't talk about. And I think that is not helpful, obviously. Like, let's talk about it. And that's why I love people like Bethany Beal or Francie Winslow, or people who, you know, just boldly talk about sex and being a sexual woman, and enjoying sex and things like that, because the church really doesn't talk about that, and it's not helpful.
I hope that Morgan stretched before they filmed this episode, because the mental gymnastics are astounding. This is why, again, I've already said this, just to be clear, this is why, again, when people say things about, like, oh, maybe they're, like, getting less severe, they're deconstructing, whatever, like, I don't know that I really buy that, because we're just, again, circumventing, we're, like, tap dancing around the words and the concepts. Basically, what Morgan just said is that purity culture did negatively affect her sex life because because it was difficult for her to integrate the belief that you're supposed to be a modern, chaste, or not modern, modest, chaste, unsexual being before marriage, and then all of a sudden be this sexually evolved, sexually interested, and very sexual person after marriage with almost no preparation or time between. And so that was a shift for her. That's something that she's had to grow in. And while it wasn't life-changing or traumatizing, it was difficult, or like a thing that she had to work through. And also is saying, no, purity culture didn't negatively affect my life in a large way. No, I don't think that purity culture is toxic. No, I don't think that we like prescribe to purity culture. Those things don't match. Like, this is what I'm saying. Just because we're dancing around it doesn't make the core teachings any different.
No, very good. And I'm about to share one that I think maybe it negatively affected me, purity culture. Yeah. But yeah, I just kind of wonder, so for those who might hear you, Morgan, and be like, right on, girl. That is a negative of purity culture. They act like you can't be sexy, and sex is something to, don't even talk about it. Don't say the S word when you're in your teens and you're not married yet. Don't even say it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, it stunts your sexuality within marriage.
Yeah.
Forever. It messed me up for 20 years. So they're, fist pumping.
The way that Paul mocks who he assumes, or in his mind that he's like drawn up in his imagination as their dissenters, is very revealing to me. Like, this has a lot of tones of sexism and misogyny, because there's this very intentional attempt to mimic a sort of stereotypical like bimbo girl voice, and it's super fucking off-putting, first of all. But second of all, really interesting to me, this like insight into the way that Paul thinks about these things. Like, they're aware of the criticisms that they're receiving, and again, just like it seems to be just that they're doing a lot of mental gymnastics to work their way around them.
But I guess I would wonder, well, like what would be the healthiest version of navigating that in your teenage years before marriage?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we asking somebody with no degrees, credentials, life experience, relevant learning about this topic to give advice about the healthiest way to work through religious trauma? Hello?
Well, first I want to say that, like, looking back, like, I'm not mad at how I was raised in the church by my parents, or like what I was taught.
Fair enough.
And like, no one is gonna get it perfectly right in raising a child. No pastor is gonna get it right in how they shepherd the flock that they have.
Well, hopefully they'll get it majorly right.
Well, hopefully.
But perfection is unlikely. But
this like insane, and to me it's insane, anger that so many people have towards the church, to me is like, part of it is on us, in that we have to have our own relationship with God. We can't rely on the pastor to lead us at all times. We can't rely on him to have a relationship with God and us to have a relationship with God through the pastor. We have to have our own relationship with the Lord and trust that he's going to reveal things to us in his timing. And I think that the journey that I've been on, and discovering what it is to be a sexual woman, is a beautiful journey. And if I had figured it all out at 18 years old, like, I don't know, yeah. There'd be other things that I'd be figuring out now.
So to summarize, Morgan thinks that people who have had negative experiences with purity culture, or have experienced life-changing, like, many, many years of trauma, or difficulty with sex, is because they didn't try hard enough to have their own individual relationship with God, and instead relied on the religious authority figures that most people assert should be trustworthy mentors and teachers in religious communities. And so therefore, if they experience trauma from purity culture, it's their fault. Fucking hello? Like, this is wild to me. I think, first of all, it's important to call out the victim blaming here, because it is never someone's fault that you have been indoctrinated with a belief that harmed you. Regardless of whether we're speaking about this in a religious context or otherwise, children are inherently vulnerable beings, and being indoctrinated with beliefs that have caused you to feel shame, fear, trauma, difficulty, anxiety about yourself, about your relationships, about your self-esteem, like any of those things, that's not your fault. I just want to be so abundantly clear, especially because I know that this channel tends to be a place for folks to share community and to try to find safety in their religious deconstruction journey. Please know that if you were traumatized by religion or by purity culture, it wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't that you didn't try hard enough or that you weren't religious enough or that you failed somehow. That's not real. It is never a child's responsibility to effectively advocate for themselves to prevent harm befalling them because the adults in your life sold you a bag of goods that wasn't real or that wasn't true. This is so beyond fucked up, but also, even if you were an adult, a lot of people feel that it should be normal or safe or okay to trust the authority figures of whatever their chosen religious denomination is. And so to turn around and say, well, I wasn't traumatized because I just have a better relationship with God than you did. Sorry that you don't trust Jesus enough. Like, this is super fucking hurtful. This is condescending. This is alienating. And this is also not doing what they think it's doing. Their whole shtick in making this content supposedly is to spread like the gospel or the good news or whatever about their religion and to, like, I'm assuming hopefully evangelize other people into their religion. And like, this is not serving. I'm just saying, like, this is not at all the endorsement that they think it is, because essentially what Morgan just said is that basically, I survived potentially maybe problematic religious teachings because I just so happened to be better than everyone else. Sorry if it befalled you, though. Not my problem. Like, why would that be a culture or a community that anyone wants to spend time with? Like, why would you choose as an adult to want to be there then? Like, this, on all accounts, this doesn't make any sense. And this is so incredibly hurtful and disingenuous and also just like, whatever.
So
well, here's another question, and before I share mine, another thing that comes to my mind, just when you mention purity culture, women say, I don't like how the church or my parents pushed modesty on me because they emphasized modesty being what you wear, don't cause the brothers to stumble. And so I could see many people saying, so that caused me to, once I got married, and you've kind of alluded to this some, but that caused me to, I gotta still cover up. I gotta be ashamed. Yeah. Do you think, and because I'm assuming modesty to a degree was emphasized in your home, can modesty be emphasized, modesty concerning the clothes you wear, but then you get married and you are just able to celebrate your body taking off the clothes with your wife? Yeah. I'm hoping you say, and because that's what I believe. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You can have parents in a church.
Does he even need her for this conversation? Just as an aside, this is a somewhat common dynamic to occur in cishet relationships, and it's also not uncommon for the female partner in this cishet exchange to feel unheard, to feel unseen, and to feel kind of frustrated by having someone talk over top of you. So if this is happening to you, please know that it's okay to feel frustrated or to not enjoy this, and also to advocate for yourself on behalf of, you know, your own wants and needs, but also your relationship, that like, hey, doesn't feel good when you talk over top of me. I'd prefer that when we're communicating and having a conversation that you honor and value the things that I'm bringing to the table, and that you also make appropriate space for me to share my feedback before you tell me what you think my opinion ought to be.
And even, oh, God forbid, my youth group leader encouraged me to dress modestly. How toxic.
Lots of people were traumatized by youth group leaders. Like, this is a very common report for folks who've deconstructed or left religion. And it's not funny, like, especially because some of the trauma that folks have encountered or experienced is because of youth group leaders violating the appropriate boundaries there and using their position of power to abuse and traumatize the folks that they were supposed to be shepherding. Like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, this is not funny. I don't understand why Paul is making a joke out of very real and traumatizing experiences, because A, it's just rude and mean, but second of all, doesn't seem to align with what their self-proclaimed goals are about, like, spreading and making their religion seem appealing to other people.
But my we'll say female youth group leader. My female youth group leader encouraged me to dress modestly. I'm hoping that you say, oh yeah, that can be encouraged, and it's not this shameful thing that takes 20 years to work through once you get married.
Yeah, I think definitely that can be the case, and I think that's especially where it is very important to have your own walk with the Lord and be in the Word and know God's heart and what He desires for you, because and know what God desires within a marriage between one man and one woman, and just that beautiful covenant, and like the freedom that comes with that covenant. And like, if you are walking with the Lord and you're in the Word regularly, you're going to know those truths.
You see?
And sometimes even knowing those truths, it might still be hard for you, but I think it will be a lot easier if you do have His truths being spoken over you on a regular.
See, this is what I'm talking about. We just victim blamed people again for trusting the people who are supposed to be trustworthy and safe figures in religion and in these communities. But also, we basically just said, this was my experience, therefore it should be, and, if you're like a good enough Christian, it will be your experience also. That's not how it works. I just feel compelled to call that onto the carpet, especially as a person who's helped folks work through religious deconstruction and religious trauma. This is not how that works. It is entirely possible, and I would argue exceedingly common, for people to have varying experiences, particularly with religion, but also just fucking life generally. That's like, for me, part of what makes being a human being interesting and beautiful and valuable is that we all will have our own very unique and very personal experiences with our environments, with life, with our own emotions, and that's very important for us to honor as real and normal. And it just is confusing to me, like this really aggressive attitude of shame that Paul and Morgan seem to have, or to have a desire to heap onto other people for not sharing their life experience. And also, for what it's worth, in my opinion, discredits them as authority figures and people who claim to want to be teachers about this subject. Anyone, regardless of their degrees or trainings or credentials, who is a good educator is willing to hold space for nuance and is willing to honor that people are going to have varying experiences with the subject matter that they're teaching about. No one who is a good educator or a good teacher is going to take this hardline stance that you will have my experience about this, otherwise you're wrong. That's not how fucking teaching works. Like this, woo!
Regular basis.
Good. And don't get me wrong, I do think the issue of modesty, the issue of sex and how to discuss that, it can become toxic. And I guess what I'm trying to point out here is I don't believe that all of these young women who are upset and guys who are upset, I don't think that their anger towards toxic purity culture is always warranted. I think sometimes it's on them, and if they were to step back, they're becoming kind of feministy, or they're becoming kind of stiff-arming, letting their whatever, as the LA Revival said, we hate the idea of saving sex for marriage, so we're angry at, like, whatever. I guess I'm just trying to say, I definitely don't think all of what people say purity culture, toxic purity culture, is actually bad.
Yeah.
But I do think there are absolutely cases where someone addresses modesty and says, what you're wearing is causing someone to sin, and you're actually, just because their modesty standard might be a little different than yours, and you're actually fine, but they are getting, like, I don't know. You see what I'm saying?
First of all, that was gobbledygook. Second of all, am I to really understand that a man whose closest proximity to a college degree is his father being a personal trainer without a college degree, to be clear, and that these two, without any relevant education or experience to rub between them, are now the authority figures about whether someone's trauma is valid or not? Come again? Like, come all the fucking way on, Paul. Come on. This can't be real. Like, tell the truth, Paul. Are you memeing at this point? Is this a joke? Like, I am so confused and just blown the fuck away. Absolutely fucking blown away that these people really got on their YouTube channel and said, you know what, on my good content today? Invalidating victims of trauma. Like, hello? I just don't, I can't understand or abide by someone actually choosing to address this topic, which again, no one forced them to address this. They chose to do this and have actively taken the hardline stance more than once in this video that people who've been traumatized by purity culture are traumatized because they're choosing to be so, or because there's something wrong with them, and because they are just like being too much about it. Like, we've openly acknowledged that purity culture can have negative effects on people's lives, and while it did not, by Paul and Morgan's account, negatively affect their life meaningfully, they are willing to acknowledge that it can go too far and it has caused people harm. However, if you're traumatized by it, it's probably you, though. Probably your fault. Literally, what is going on? This, again, I know I already said it, but I just want to be super clear. If you've been traumatized by purity culture, by religion, by a harmful or destructive group, it wasn't your fault. There was nothing that you could have done or not done or said or not said or believed or not believed that would have made that your fault. That's not how trauma fucking works, and it's also not how victimization fucking works. People who've been abused, and especially children who are indoctrinated with a belief that caused them to have trauma and negative impacts on their mental health and well-being, are not to blame for those things. This is not an unpopular stance to take. Like, this is not the work I thought I would be doing today, which is advocating that people who've been traumatized are allowed to place the responsibility with the appropriate party, which is the people and or institutions that have traumatized them.
That can be a tough balance.
We don't belittle the fact and truth that so many men and women have taken the idea of purity and just run with it and added way too many things that aren't even in scripture. We don't take it lightly that a lot of men and women have been hurt by preachers preaching a sermon that's not biblical, that's not God's heart. And like, it really has hurt or damaged you for a long period of time. Like, I know that there are men and women out there that have been affected by this and are working through it. And so I just pray that you go to the Father, you look at his truth, and you find what he genuinely desires, and you are able to break off these lies and these condemnations from the enemy.
Which are truly legalism, because like you said, it's not scriptural, and someone's kind of going off the deep end and acting like what they say is the word of God when it's not. So that balance of finding older men that can speak into your life, pastors that you trust, but also knowing if this person is actually getting off track. And you guys comment below and let us know your thoughts on that specific thing. But here's when I was thinking through it, Morgan, and I must say, when I think about myself growing up, yes, like, purity was really emphasized. Dating while we were in high school was frowned upon, because the idea of, you're not going to get married in high school, so why are you dating? Dating just, as your emotions get fueled, riled up, and you start liking this person, it leads to more. So why would you do it if you're not going to get married? So some people would, I think, look at certain aspects of the way I grew up and say, yeah, purity culture. Modesty was emphasized and so forth. I don't think that really, just thinking on it right now, maybe I'm being naive, but I don't think any of that negatively affected our sex life.
Which is totally fine if that's the case. Like, that's Paul and Morgan's business. That's none of my business. And it's also none of the internet's business to try to like definitively assert what their experience is or has been. But it is wholly disingenuous and also actively fucking harmful to insist that because this was their experience, it is therefore no one else's. And just because they give this like very lip service caveat about like, well, and I know that there are people who really have been affected and been damaged, which, by the way, you're not damaged if you've been traumatized by purity culture. You're not damaged goods. You're perfectly good and whole and beautiful and wonderful. And also that, like, yeah, you know, people have been damaged by this, but also to go back to religion and go back to the thing that traumatized you, and just make sure that you're more discerning about God's word this time. Like, this is what I'm talking about when I say that these people have made this decision to try to distance themselves from the negative optics of being associated with purity culture, with fundamentalism, with legalism. They just did it. Oh yeah, that's very legalist. What we're doing, that's not legalism. We do super believe that everyone should abide by the exact letter of the holy text that we've decided is the truth. But that's not legalism. That's not what fundamentalism is. No, certainly that's not us. Like, that, it's the same. They're still peddling and promoting the same beliefs and the same problematic underpinnings and values that does very much traumatize and harm people, and just saying that they don't. Like, if I take a shit on somebody's front porch and I'm like, no, I didn't, You still did, though. You still took a shit on their front porch. It doesn't change the objective reality and the facts of the matter, which is that there's a hot, smelly fucking dookie on the porch. Like, you can't escape that reality. And I just wish that we could all acknowledge the fucking stink in the room. Like, it's really not that hard.
Got married, had sex for the first time, and then weeks, months, years later, I don't think any of that did. But here is one thing that I think.
Also, I'm pretty sure that they cut out the section of this video. I actually caught this video before they took the like live replay down, and I'm pretty sure that they fucking edited this and chopped the bits out of it, because this was the video where Morgan outright admitted that if their child was having premarital sex at the age of 16, that they would kick him out of their house. This video is only 24 minutes long. We're at 19 minutes and 38 seconds, and I have a sneaking suspicion that that's not in this fucking video. And I did fucking download it, and I can't find it. I'm so mad because I downloaded this specifically because I watched that comment and I knew that they were gonna fucking delete it. This is the other issue that I have with the content that Paul and Morgan make, is that they're happy to make these really out-of-pocket statements on their live, think about it, and then realize, that's not going to age well, and then edit it out and pretend like it never happened. The accountability is nowhere to be found, and I just don't take kindly to folks who are going to get on the internet and parade around and peacock around like I'm the authority, I can't do any wrong, everything that I say is correct because I'm wearing the shield of God's word. But also, don't talk about that thing that I said. It hurts my feelings. I don't like it. I didn't say that. Like, yes, the fuck you did. And just because you edited it out of this video doesn't mean that people didn't see it.
Could have. Okay. All right. You agree. One thing that I think could have, though, is even though I don't think there was like a sex was shamed growing up for me, it was like, don't have sex. Literally, it was God said don't have sex before marriage. So, don't have sex before marriage. There's negative consequences that come with having sex with people that aren't your husband or wife. Don't do it. So it was kind of a black and white thing that some people might say, oh, that's harmful. No, I thought that was fine. But sex was not talked about very much in our home. It was not talked about very much as I grew up through my teenage years and started getting very curious about this. It just wasn't. So then when I, got to these, my upper teenage years, when I moved out, I just became like, I want to learn about sex. And I think it resulted in me going overboard in my, I want to learn everything there is to know. And it was probably a little premature. Not to say you can't learn about sex before you get married, because there is a healthy way to do that. But I was just like, I just want to know. And if it had been talked about in a healthy way more often, it would have lowered that for me a little bit, and I could have approached it in a more healthy way.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that's probably a lot of people, like, as soon as they got an inch of freedom, they ran with it and probably found out a few too many things that they didn't need to know quite right away.
Yes, so maybe young parents watching that have kids that are going to be teenagers soon and stuff, really, my advice would be look at how to, in a very healthy, not going overboard, but protected way, invite your kids into conversations, not just about the very vague ideas of sex, but go ahead and go ahead and start talking to them and saying, guys, I think that would have helped me.
Yeah, definitely.
To be clear, I don't disagree that people should have open and honest conversations about sex and all different types of things with their children, because that's supported in the research as being a valuable and transformative tool in terms of creating trust, in terms of creating successful and healthy attachment and bonds with your kids. However, first of all, I just want to point out that if you're waiting until your child is a teenager to have a talk with them about sex, intimacy, or safety surrounding those topics, too fucking late. Way too fucking late. We very much need to normalize that it is important and okay and a shame-free thing to do to educate kids about sex and intimacy and their body parts, about safety and about physical intimacy and boundaries when they're small. The conversation about bodily autonomy and boundaries starts when children are toddlers, when they, if they don't want to hug grandpa, they don't have to. That's an important conversation that carries over into the conversation about about sex, about consent, about healthy relationships with sex and intimacy and things like that. We've talked about it on the channel before, but also teaching children about the anatomical names for their body parts is a very important conversation and a protective factor when we talk about abuse. But also, again, a carryover skill when we talk about having a like safe or healthy or non-traumatizing interaction with sex or intimacy later as adults, if that's something that calls to them or feels relevant to them. So bad advice. But also, I just am confused why, again, these people who had a kid like 15 minutes ago are now positioning themselves as not only biblical experts, but also the parenting biblical experts on top of being the sexual biblical experts. Like, there's just so many things that they're experts at. Okay, I'm gonna scrub through the rest of this video to see if they talk about the thing. I don't think they do, but let me scrub through this and I'll be right back. Okay, I actually just looked through my computer because I knew that I downloaded it, but they must have clipped it before the download finished because I still can't find the portion after their little Patreon roll where they answered questions and somebody asked them the question, what would you do if your kid was having premarital sex? And Paul, with Morgan off camera, literally says that he would kick out their child if they were 18, maybe if they were 16. Probably if they were 18, I'd kick them out, which is wild. And also abusive, to be clear, but we don't have video of that, so we're not going to talk about it, I guess. But again, I just want to draw attention to the fact that there is a repeated attempt to like verbally distance themselves from the problematic leanings of these beliefs while making no meaningful effort to actually distance themselves or to adjust or change their belief system to be less harmful, less traumatizing, or to promote beliefs that are less harmful or less traumatizing, which is a problem in my opinion. And again, like why we continue to make this content, because it just has the potential to hurt so many vulnerable and like impressionable people. It's very frustrating to me that this is like continuing to be made, this content. But to be clear, again, I know that I've said this like 3,000 times in this video, but I want to say it again. Being traumatized by religion, by fundamentalism, by purity culture is never your fault. It's never something that you did or didn't do. And it's not okay for people who claim to want to be educators or experts or mentors or teachers or whatever to take that hardline stance and to promote that as an okay thing to believe. That's not. And I'm happy to speak to the clinical impact of this because, again, this is like very real life work that I've done. The impact and the long-term, like the far-reaching effects of having been traumatized by this culture in this particular way is something that can't be understated. It really genuinely is so fucking difficult and gut-wrenching and hurtful and sad and painful to try to unlearn these things, especially, again, when people are indoctrinated with these beliefs as children. The way that this impacts a person's mental health and their mental illness and shows up in their relationships and their self-esteem and their ability to like work through emotions and like navigate the world, it can't be understated. And I just am so frustrated that Paul and Morgan are promoting this with reckless disregard for the way that it quite literally ruins people's lives. So yeah, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that this is like a full reject, don't send, did not like. I say this on all the videos too, but I do want to be clear. Please don't go and hate watch their content. Please don't go and leave hate comments or downvote their videos or things like that. I know that it's very human, and I saw a comment too that I want to be clear. I'm not saying this from a place of shame or judgment. It's okay to be human and to have an emotional reaction to stuff like this because it sucks, but also just from the perspective of like not wanting this content to get the engagement and the algorithm boost. If you're feeling sort of frustrated about like, I wish that people, didn't see this or that this content wasn't getting made, one of the ways that we can help is to not be content consumers and to not engage with that. So if you don't agree with their messaging and the way that they're potentially harming folks, the best thing that we can do is not engage with it and to not give them essentially an internet thumbs up. That being said, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. We do talk about stuff like this, and we also talk about less traumatizing and more light and fun things. So I'd love to have you stay for that and share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.